Hello, YOL students. In this video, we'll discuss if statements. An if statement is a crucial part of any program. It is a control flow statement that can help you to run a specific section of code or just skip it based on a certain condition. Up until now, we learned how to create a program that has multiple lines of code in it and run it sequentially. But in this section, we'll learn how to control what is being run, executed, or not. Let's begin with the syntax of a simple if statement. We can say the if statement contains from three parts. First is the keyword if that actually tells Java that this is a control flow statement. Next is going to be parentheses. In the parentheses, we'll have the Boolean expression, or also called condition. And then the curly braces that forms the block of code of if statement, or also called body of if statement. Let's assume the Boolean expression will become true. This body, or the block of code, will be executed. Now, if the Boolean expression becomes false, this body will be just ignored and we'll continue with the rest of the statements in our code. Now let's see an example. Here I have the class if-else statements, and I have the main method inside of the class. All the code I'm going to write in scope of the main method. The first, I'm going to create an integer grade. I'm going to assign a value of 55 to it. And then I'm going to create the if statement as we already mentioned. The syntax is going to be first comes if keyword, then parentheses, and then the body of the if statement or the block of code. In parentheses, I will put a condition. I want to point out that grade more than 50, we remember this from the relational operators, this is a comparison. And this comparison doesn't have much of the use right now. However, if we place this comparison inside of the if statement, grade more than 50, we call it a condition or a Boolean expression. Right? Now, based on this condition, we control a specific block of code. Will it be executed or not? Now, inside of the body, I'm going to go and place a system out print statement. Inside, I'm going to say, great job. You passed. Now let's run the program and understand what happens. If I run right now, when my integer grade is 55, I run the program and I'm going to see in the console, great job, you passed. So first we initialize the integer grade to 55. We use this grade for our condition in if statement. So we check if grade, which is 55, is more than 50. And the condition becomes true. Means we will execute whatever it's in the body of the if statement. That's why we see this printout statement, great job, you passed, in our console. Let's have another example. What if I have 30 as an initialization for the grade, as a value for the grade? Now, first step, we initialize grade to 30. We use grade in the condition and check if 30 is more than 50. And then we decide, or if statements will decide what is actually going to do with the block of code. Can you guess the output? Will we have this message or not in the console? So if I execute the code, nothing happens. Why? Well, first of all, our condition will become false in this case. When the condition becomes false, we just skip the body of the if statement and continue with the rest of the code. But right now, we don't have anything after the if statement. Now let's take a look of one of the flows that we have. Now here is going to be, if integer grade is 65, we'll have a condition in if statements, grade more than 50. And this condition becomes true. Means we'll go and execute whatever the if statement body is. If we go to integer grade 30, now the grade is going to be compared against 50. If it's more than 50, the condition becomes false, and we skip, we ignore the body of the if statement and execute whatever is going to be outside of the if statement as the rest of the code. Next, we want to understand the if-else statement. Now the else part, the else block or else clause, it is an optional addition to the if statement. And we need this block when we want to execute specific instructions when the condition becomes false. When we go back to our code, we need to understand a slight detail. If our condition becomes true, grade is 55, we check if it's more than 50, we get executed the body of the if statement. But what happens when the condition is false? Let's say we have grade 30. We execute, and nothing happens. Well, let's say in this case, when the condition becomes false, I want to actually execute some specific instructions. Let's say I want to say, try better next time. Well, for this part, we'll need to use the else block. Let's review the simple syntax of if-else statement. Here we'll have the if keyword with a condition and block of code. And we'll follow with the else keyword. Notice how here is no condition because we rely on the condition from the if statement, and then the block of code. Now, if the condition becomes true, we'll execute the body of the if part and exit the if statement. And if the condition becomes false, we'll execute the body of the else part and exit the if statement. Here is going to be the flow. We have the condition. If it's true, we execute the if code and just exit the if statement, and whatever it's after it will execute. Or we have the condition that becomes false and we'll execute the else code and then exit the if statement, and whatever is going to be after the if statement will execute. Let's get back to our code and do this practice. So let's assume for this example, for this program, we'll want to do following. First, if the grade is more than 50, I will say, well, great job, you passed. Now, in case the grade is less than 50, I will say just try better next time. And as we can see, we need to actually execute something whenever the condition becomes false. For this case, I'm going to use the else block. I will say else keyword, block of code, or the body of else. And here, notice how there is no condition after else keyword. Why? Because we rely on the condition from the if block of code. All right. Now here inside, I'm going to go and say system out print, and we'll type try better next time. Great. Now let's assume our grade is going to be 55. And this example, we execute the code and we get great job, you passed. Why is that? We initialize grade to 55. We check the condition if grade is more than 50, where grade is 55, and that becomes true. If the condition is true, we execute the if block of code. We skip the else and execute everything that is after the if statement. Let's test it with a 30. Now, if we have 30, we execute the code and you'll see try better next time. Why is that? We initialize the grade to 30. We check if the grade is more than 50, which grade is 30. It means 30 is now more than 50. This will become false. What we do, we skip the body of the if and we execute the else block of code. Then we resume with the other statements in our program. Let's see an example of the picture that we have. Here, the grade is 65. We check if grade is more than 50. The condition becomes true. We execute the body of the if. We then just skip the else body and execute everything that is after the if statement. Next example is when grade is 30. We check if the grade is more than 50, the condition becomes false. And notice how we skip the body of the if, and we go and execute directly the else part, the else block of code. And we'll have try better next time. Then after, we just execute whatever is outside of the if statement. And here we can assume that whenever we have the if else, If the condition is true, we execute whatever it's in the if block. If the condition is false, we execute whatever it's in the else block. Now let's discuss 3 common mistakes that students tend to do. First mistake would be using condition with else block. As I already mentioned, notice how else block doesn't have any condition after. Why? Because the else relies on the condition from the if part. Now, if I go and enter a condition grade less than 50, I will save it so Java sees the difference. Now, we'll have an underline and Java complains, right? Java is not satisfied right now because we entered the condition for the else block, which is not allowed. So make sure you do not do that. Second mistake is else without if statement. Well, you cannot use else without if statement. We understood that the else block of code is an optional to the if statement, but we cannot use it independently. If we have just else, Java will complain because the else, it has to be attached to the if statement. So please make sure you do not just use the else part. The last one is use the lines of code in between of them. So nothing stops you to go and actually place some statements in between of the if and else. Let's say I'm going to go and say system out print in between, and I will say this statement interrupts if else block. All right. So if you include a statement in between, and pay attention, we have if, we have the condition, we have the block of code, and it's totally fine right now. Then we enter a condition, a statement, a random line of code, and then we say else, and again the block of code. This will not be connected to this if statement. It thinks it's an individual, independent else block, which is not possible to do. So please make sure do not use any additional lines in between the if and else when you have both of them. Here's another point that I wanted to mention. Make your condition right. Now, it is crucial to understand that the condition that you're going to put in the if statement will actually control what is being executed or not. And a very slight mistake in the condition might lead to some unexpected outputs. Now let's say this example where I check the grade if it's more than 50. And actually I want to say that the score or the grade that is going to be 50 and more is going to be the one that you can pass with. Now what happens if I go and say, well, my grade is 50. I execute the code and I see try better next time. Now what is the problem? The problem is I do not use the proper relational operator. And you can see we go to the false because the grade is not more than 50, right? It is equal to 50. And we go to the false part. But I actually want to include, so in this case it will be better to use more or equal to. And more or equal to will solve this bug, right? Now we have the great job, you're passed. So please remember, whenever you use your condition, make sure you cover all of the aspects of your requirement and you actually put a right condition inside of the if expression. Next part we need to understand is the else if clause. Now, so far we learned how to perform based on one condition different actions. If it's true, we do something. If it's false, we do something else. And in some situations, you want to have multiple conditions, and based on each condition, you want to perform a specific task or specific instructions. Now for this, we will use the else if clause. Now what is else if clause? Now basically, here's the simple syntax. We'll have again the if part first, which goes with the if keyword and the condition itself. We'll have the body of it. And now we have another else if with the condition itself, right? So you can see this is another condition that you can add to your if statement. Now, if the condition first will become false, you add another condition that you want to check after the first one was validated. And if the condition 2 is going to become true, we'll execute the body. If not, we'll go to the next one. I want to point out that you can have as many as you need else if conditions. You can add 1, you can add 10, and it's optional to use with the if statement. At the end, we will follow with the else block. The else block is going to have the same logic that we had before. If all of the conditions above became false, we'll execute the else block. Now let's modify our program in the way that it doesn't just print you passed or you don't, but actually prints you a specific alphabetical system grade what you actually get based on the score that you have. For example, if it's going to be more than 80, we can say that you got an A. If it's going to be more than 70, you can say you got an B, and so on and so forth. So let's modify our code in the way that actually will fit that program. So we will erase the else part for now. We'll say that if the grade is more or equal to 80, I'll print that you got an A. Now the next, I'm gonna be following with the else if clause. Basically, I want to add another condition. So I'm gonna say else if parentheses block of code. Do not confuse with the if else, right? The order is gonna be first goes else and the second goes if. This is the way that we can add another condition to our if statement. So the next I'm gonna say, well, if the top one became false and the number is not greater than 80, I want to check if it's greater than 70. So if grade more or equal to 70, I will go ahead and say, well, you got a B. You got a B. The next part is going to be again, else if. I will add the condition if grade is more or equal to 60. And the answer is going to be, well, if it's more or equal to 60, you got a C. Now, the last one that I want to add again, else if, another condition, I will say if the grade is more or equal to 50, well, we will just say, well, system out print, you got a D. Now the else part, everything that is going to be below 50, we will include in the else, right? We don't want to add another condition. So everything else, if all of these conditions become false, right, we will say, well, you got an F. You got a F. There you go. So pay attention how we utilize the concept of Java going from top to bottom, right? So first of all, we will have a grade that actually is a number. And that number is going to be first. Check if it's more than 80. If the grade is more than 80, means we go and execute the body of if and then exit this if statement. Now, if this becomes false, if the number, for example, is 77, well, this will become false, and we'll go to the next one to check, to the else if. And we'll check if the grade is now, well, if it's not more than 80, probably it's going to be more than 70, and we check this one. Now this, if it becomes true, we'll execute this one. If false, we'll go to the next one, and so on and so forth. So let's execute the program based on, well, let's say I'm going to use 88. You can guess the output, you got an A, right? The grade is initialized to 88. We go to the first condition and check if grade is more than 80. Yes, it is. So the condition becomes true. We will execute this, you got an A, and we exit completely the if statement and go and execute whatever it's after. Now, what if I go and enter, well, 71, right? In this case, I execute and you see you got a B. Well, what happens here? We check, well, is grade more than or equal to 80? This is false. So we just bypass this, ignore this body of the if, and check the second condition. The second condition is grade more or equal to 70. Is it? Yes, it is, because it's 71. So we'll execute this you got a B. The next step, let's check with, let's say 55. If the 55 will actually, this is going to become false, this is going to become false, this is going to become false, and in this range we'll get in, right? Because grade is more or equal to 50. So we will have executed, you got a D. What happens if I say, well, something like 35? I will execute this one, and you got an F. So the conclusion here is going to be that you can have as many conditions as you want attached to the if statement, and that's achieved with the else if clause. The else if will follow another condition that you want to include. Now, from all of the conditions that you have, only one block of code can be executed. You cannot have at the same time executed the first one and the last one or in the middle one. Only one of these blocks is going to be true, and that's going to be executed. But if any of this doesn't become true, what we'll execute is the else block of code.